Hi guys, welcome to this CnC Rivals unit tier list. Now you might ask, you can't put units in a tier list because they just do different roles and things. But I think me, Blade, and Striker, who also had a big help in Blade putting this tier list together, have kind of decided that there are units that you can kind of associate in different levels, and some units are just strictly better than others. So that's what we're going to talk about today. And speaking of Blade, I've got him here. Blade, hello.
Hello, Excoundrel. How are you doing?
Well, beautiful, because I've got you with me to do this tier list.
Absolutely,
And
absolutely. I will add that in terms of the tier list, a lot of the tiering is based on the current expected metagame. So certain units might be in a different place than you expect them to be, simply because they don't perform well against the expected decks you're likely to see.
yeah, a lot of this is also defined by kind of Tiberium master players and upwards, and how things perform in tournament levels as well, including all of the events that you get in Command & Conquer Rivals. If you don't know, Blade has got a wonderful YouTube channel, which you should 100% go and subscribe to, and if you do not, I will not be a very happy bunny. You can find it wherever the links are going to be, in the description, in the comments, on Blade's head, on his channel. He also has a Twitch channel. He streams pretty much daily Command & Conquer Rivals, and basically 10-0s every event, 15-0s every event. He's essentially the best streaming player out there, so you should go and watch him on Twitch too. And subscribe to him, and give him all your Twitch Prime money.
Thanks for that, Excoundrel. I have to say, there is one event I didn't get perfect score in, which is the very first event run. We had to get 25-0, but other than that, yeah, every single one.
Well, I think that's probably because you got boned by Alicia at the end, but... you know, I think you've come a long way as a player since then, Blade. And I would arguably say you are much better than when you did the Rivals live event in January. I personally think you're much better than you were then as well. So
Yeah, I think it's fair to say a lot of us have come a long way since then. That was a very long time ago, obviously. So yeah.
right, we've been fluffing for so long. Let's start off with something a bit more simple, and then we'll dive into the actual unit tier list. Let's start off with the commanders, because we wanted to separate the commanders away from the generic units, because they are more limited in terms of your choice. So you can't, massively change the commanders that you're going to use. And you can see the tier list now up on your screens. Just quickly run through it. You can see S is Seth and Strongarm. Oksana is in between S and A, and we'll briefly touch on that. A is Jackson Liang, B Jade, C Solomon, and Kane down in the dumpster, because Kane is garbage.
Yeah, so the reason we've got Oksana in between S and A, Oksana is the best commander for specific decks, such as the Giga Cannon deck, you have to play Oksana. The Avatar deck, you have to play Oksana. But I think, generally speaking, in the metagame right now, Seth is the stronger NOD choice, which is why Seth is slightly above her there.
Yeah, and I also think that Seth also frees up the slot for having no Flame Troopers in your deck, and it can give you a bit more flexibility too, because a population cap free Flame Trooper on the map is just so good for the meta, which is kind of dominated by super early aggression, because they essentially cut 10 seconds off the game if you try and take the first two pads as quickly as physically possible. So he's always really strong. And why is Strongarm over Jackson now? Why is Strongarm just that much better than Jackson?
So Jackson has received quite a lot of nerfs recently. The duration of the buff is now down to 8 seconds, I believe, instead of 10. And the reload benefit has been reduced. So any unit that has a reload bar, such as the Orca or the Orca Bomber or the MLRS, they've reduced the potency of both the buff commanders on those units. But Jackson was the one that really abused those, whereas Oksana has always been used to buff units that don't have a bar anyway, so it's not a big difference for Oksana. So that's one of the main reasons Jackson's down below Strongarm. The other one is simply there's a lot more drone swarm style decks around, and a lot of decks playing a lot of light vehicles like attack bikes and Pitbull, and Strongarm just provides excellent support against those things.
Yeah, Strongarm just so versatile. And also, she's versatile, right? You literally can slot her into most GDI decks, and you will find a use for her commander power in some way, shape, or form on the map that you're playing on. Jaden Solomon, you might... Oh, sorry, carry on.
Yeah, I was going to say, in a typical game where both players are playing a tier 1, I would say, deck, then Strongarm is extremely good. It's just very good against those units. Strongarm is only really weak against tech decks, and those are, as you will see when we get to our tier list, not highly rated by us.
No, and you can see Jade and Solomon. People will say, why is Jade so low? The reason Jade is so low is that you have to play her with some kind of chemical interaction. And that limits your deck choices, it limits your unit choices. And while she performs excellently in Chemical Warrior base rush decks or decks that utilize the Chemical Buggy, she's not as adaptable as the other commanders, and therefore it isn't going to be high up on the tier list when you're considering it in the grand spectrum of everything. And plus, those Chemical Warrior decks aren't as, I mean, they're just beatable these days. Like there are a lot of people who know how to counter them well enough, and Chemical Warriors aren't quite as strong as they used to be, I guess, in the way that the meta was shaped.
Yeah, that's exactly it. Chemical Warriors are still a pretty strong unit, but like you say, Jade just doesn't have a niche. Oh, she does have a niche. She's only niche. You can only play Jade with the chemical deck. Jade really has no role outside of that because the missile is slow enough that a person who's paying attention can dodge it with most units.
And I think also when the Jade Chemical Warrior decks kind of first came into existence, especially when people were running 3 and 3, the NOD, 3 Barracks, 3 War Factory units, people were like, oh, why are these Chemical Warriors just rushing across the map? And sometimes it would take you by surprise. Now people kind of realize that you have to contest first missile very heavily versus Jade decks that are trying to run the Chemical Warrior combo. And then even if you lose first missile, if you do a good amount of blocking and buy a lot of units that are good against Chemical Warriors, you can generally stop them going for that massive base rush as easily as they used to be able to. Because that surprise factor's kind of gone now. People know exactly what it is that happens when the Jade Chemical Warriors get close to your base. So it's it's lost some of its efficacy from that. And Solomon down in C because expensive power. He's more of a tempo play, and he's a good tempo play versus tech decks as well. And again, also tech decks just aren't as big at this current moment in time.
Yeah, like you say, Solomon really more of a tempo play, and it's very hard to be in a position where you can save up 150 for a tempo play because a lot of the time you wouldn't need that tempo if you just invested that Tiberium in units. Yes. So that's why Solomon is down in C.
Right, so let's move on to the units now as we quickly brushed over the commanders. And you can see, this is the list for NOD. Let's start with NOD to begin with. You can see we've got S to D. We're only going to touch on some of the units. If you have any questions about these particular units, you can go to Blade's YouTube channel and ask comments on his videos and he'll answer. I'm not going to answer, or he'll answer in my videos, but Blade's the guy here that you want to ask, so we can go through it. But we'll start off with lasers in S tier. That might seem odd, but Blade, why are we put lasers in S tier?
So I think that lasers are basically the only NOD unit you have to play. I think it's almost impossible to make a NOD deck that doesn't have lasers and have it be successful. Lasers are just simply so important to NOD, and the reason is that NOD tanks lose to GDI tanks. So if you play a deck where you have any kind of War Factory, which is basically every deck in the game currently, if you're relying on the Scorpion tank, which is also in the S tier because it's so absurdly good, and you play against Predator tanks, you will lose that mirror. So you need a way to catch back up, and something like a Banshee or laser drones is too much of a cost to tech switch into to be a reliable answer. So lasers are really your only option. You need to play an anti-vehicle infantry in your deck, and the only options are lasers and marauders. And lasers shoot up, so they take the S tier.
Yeah, lasers can point their laser cannons upwards. Go on to A tier, you'll notice some things like militants, flames, attack bikes. They are just in A tier because they are so core to a lot of NOD decks. Let's talk about stealth tank though. This is something that's been creeping up in terms of popularity, but also in terms of kind of its respected power level. Why have we got stealth tank up in here?
So the stealth tank used to be more of a C tier unit when it had a 12-second reload time. The fact they changed it to 10 and they've now changed it to 11 is a huge deal because when you are trying to contest a missile as the missile is about to fire, the last portion of the missile, if you had a stealth tank with a 12-second reload, it would kill a unit and then your unit could arrive and fire the missile before the stealth tank had reloaded. The reduction to the reload time means the stealth tank can now kill that new unit before the missile fires, which is a huge difference in its power level. Also, the meta has shifted more towards a GDI air style, and stealth tank is the best unit for dealing with air units.
Yeah, especially because Orcas are so popular as well, and Borkas too. The stealth function on the stealth tank essentially means that you can either take 1-for-1 trades or just outright win in some scenarios. Banshee, I think, is obvious. It's just the best, in my eyes, just the best NOD air unit out there. Mutant Marauders, let's have a look. This is something that's new and probably something that I think maybe 3 or 4 days ago Blade might not have considered so high up on the tier list, but recently has kind of surged into the meta. Why we got Mutant Marauders here?
Yeah, so the reason Mutant Marauder has picked up so much is it did get a very, very significant buff in the last patch. I think it was something like 25% DPS. Also, there's been a big shift towards riflemen and militants over flame troopers and shock troopers. Mutant Marauders have so many hit points that they are basically immune to riflemen and militants. Like, obviously, you can't just leave them AFK against a rifleman or a militant, but they last so long that you can have them perform their job even whilst under fire from a rifleman or militant. And that is just such a colossal deal, because it means they can actually kill like an enemy tank whilst being shot at by riflemen or militants.
Yeah, I think they're just beefy boys. They are beefy boys.
They're so that's what I've been calling them. They're beefy boys. And Copycat has been playing the Marauder Chemical Warrior deck, which he has been calling Beef Wall, because you simply form a wall of beefy boys and no one can ever get through it.
Talking about beefy boys, we'll move on to the B tier now, Chemical Warriors. And I think we could tie Chemical Buggy in here as well, because they do loosely, or not even loosely, they do quite heavily attach to that Mutant Marauder point that you were just bringing up.
Yeah, so I think that the Mutant Marauder deck is significantly more powerful if you play it with a chemical unit. The reason is that the counter to a Mutant Marauder is either an air unit, because it can't shoot it, or an anti-infantry infantry. So the things that kill anti-infantry infantry the best in the game are Chemical Warriors and Chemical Buggy. I think the Chemical Warriors are a much better choice if you want to play the Jade deck and you want to bomb people's bases. But if you're playing a Chemical Buggy, which I think is actually the superior variant at this point, I think Oksana is much stronger. The reason for this, and people ask me this a lot, people often say, why don't you play Jade with your Chemical Buggy deck? If you want to use a Jade missile as an iron cannon, as in to shoot a tile that has a chemical spray on it, a Chemical Warrior is much better for controlling that explosion. A Chemical Buggy will just leave a trail of clouds everywhere, and when you do Jade it, you will just kill the entire map, including your Chemical Buggy. Like, almost every time, you will always kill your own unit, which makes it way too expensive. Whereas a Chemical Warrior can put down one cloud, walk away, and you can nuke exactly that tile, and you can control the explosion. Also, Oksana on a Chemical Buggy will tear through infantry unbelievably quickly. So that's why I believe you should play Jade with Chemical Warriors and Oksana with Chemical Buggy. And either of these units combined with Mutant Marauder makes for an extremely potent combination that can really only be defeated by air.
And yeah, I think we've seen, if you've been watching Blade's stream, which by the way, twitch.tv/13LADETV, is that right?
Yep, that's correct, yeah.
Yep, you can go and check out him playing variants of that deck, and he's very informative and also super chill, so I do recommend you go and watch that. Artillery in B tier, this is something that most people have considered artillery a meme for a very long time, but artillery has now found its way into B tier. What do you? What is this about?
So yeah, artillery has basically been meme for almost the entire existence of rifles. There was a very brief period early in the beta when it was absolutely outrageous, and it destroyed everything. And ever since they nerfed it from then, it's been completely unplayable. And a large part of this is its functionality. When you order an artillery to shoot a unit outside of its cone, it used to repack itself, turn, and then try and unpack. But if the unit it was targeting was moving, it would just continue turning and it would never unpack. So it was just awful. But now they've changed it so that not only can it turn while set up, but it turns really quickly while set up now. So you can have this thing bombard basically 3 tiles in any direction quite easily and quickly, and its damage is huge, and its fire rate is really good now. So this is a terrifying unit at this point. I mentioned in my interview with Shookit on Meta Hub, I think it is, about artillery being absolutely terrifying now. It just destroys all ground units. It's so scary. And if you combine it with a stealth tank, which is the best anti-air unit in the game, it basically can take over the entire game. The only reason that it's in B tier and not higher is that it is still in the tech lab, and it is, or the Temple of Nod for Nod, and that 120 initial cost is so backbreaking that is the main reason you will see almost all tech units are in C and D tier.
Yeah, and now speaking of C and D tier, as you look down towards those sad areas of the tier list, it is mostly populated by either things like Buggy, which have been made redundant really by Cyber Wheels for the most part, Laser Drones, which is just a garbage unit, Venom, which really doesn't have a great place in the meta, like you said, because of stealth tanks, but everything else is just a lot of Temple of Nod tech units. And that is for the pure reason that in most high-level games, as long as you know what you're doing as an aggro deck, and this is something that you probably could learn from if you go and check out Suzaku, Blade, anybody that's playing these aggro decks, as long as you know how to control early missiles and just charge missiles and pressure your opponent as soon as possible, most people will either struggle to get their first tech unit out or get their first tech unit out and lose. So that's why tech is generally on the lower end of our tier lists. But specifically, something that probably would have been up in A or B tier in the last couple of patches, Avatar now finds itself down at C. Blade, why have we put Avatar in C?
Yeah, so as you say, the initial cost of the tech lab is so high that it makes it extremely difficult to realistically take back the game by making a tech unit. Normally, to actually reliably build them, you have to have 2 harvesters. The pop cap cost in the early game of 2 harvesters means you usually lose the first missile. Against a competent opponent, you always will lose the first missile. And then your tech unit has to come out and immediately dominate the game. Avatar used to do this until it got triple nerfed. It got nerfed movement speed, hit points, and damage. And also, people have started adapting. It used to be that Avatar would come out and everyone was playing War Factory ground-based units, and Avatar would mow through them. And this led people to believe Avatar was overpowered. But in fact, all you needed to do was play a proper answer, which is why Suzaku started playing the Orca, because he needed an answer to Avatar. And he was easily defeating Avatar decks, even before the nerfs, because he simply had the correct answer. And me and Striker were playing the Basilisk deck, the Gigalisk or the Nagrolisk, depending on which variant, which simply had a Basilisk in the deck. So if you saw your opponent going for Avatar, you would make a Basilisk, and it hard countered it. So people were simply unwilling to play answers to Avatar, and instead just complained it was overpowered. And it got nerfed repeatedly. And now, when you do make it, it just doesn't take over the game anymore. It's actually at a point where you can kill it with... I killed an Avatar the other day with 2 Mutant Marauders.
Damn.
How do you think my opponent felt when he made a 230 cost unit and I killed it with 120 cost of infantry from the barracks?
Felt pretty bad.
He probably took Avatar out of his deck after that.
Yeah, Avatar's not in a great space again anymore, and like you said, now, especially now that for GDI, the counters are actually popular as well. Is something else, because Orca never used to be popular. Previous to the Orca changes, Orca wasn't exactly the most popular unit in the world, and neither was Basilisk. But then people started playing it as a counter. It's kind of how meta shifts. We could get into a whole conversation about how units are actually sleeper okay, and it's just all about the shifting meta, but we won't get into that conversation just now. Finally, just to round out the NOD tier list, Scarabs down in D. Most high-level players would not even need this explaining, but Scarabs are often the qualm of like silver to platinum players. Why are Scarabs so garbage?
So the reason that Scarabs are not very strong is that a Scarab unit is 2 mobile bombs for 30 Tiberium. If these mobile bombs are caught whilst moving, because they have a long setup time, they just die, and you're sad. If they get to set up, they get to kill 2 units normally. That's normally how a Scarab works. Sometimes people will send a big tanky unit like an APC, and it'll just trade, which is fine, because an APC is very expensive. But what actually happens most of the time is people play Militants or Cyber Wheels, and they send 2 of them, and even if the Scarab kills both, you're still down 10 Tiberium on your Scarab. And then setting up a new Scarab is almost impossible against the Militant or Cyber Wheel, which can catch it in transit and kill it before it kills them.
Yeah, and that's really the only explanation you need as to why Scarabs are trash. Right, so let's move on to GDI very quickly, and you can see S tier, Pitbull, and Drone Swarm. I don't think this needs explaining. If you played the recent Cabal War games, you'll realise why Pitbull is just so ridiculously broken. It just does everything. It's just a really versatile unit that, in general, feels a really, really good space in the meta. It's got great anti-air capabilities, even when in combination with other Pitbulls or even just infantry. It's got good anti-vehicle capabilities as well. So, I mean, Pitbull is in general just a great unit. And Drone Swarm is just very powerful right now too. Good pad holders, good anti-infantry. We won't go into it too much. So have a look at the A tier then. All the way down, and you might notice that APC is up in the A tier. And most people, again, one of those units that they used to consider a meme, but APC has had some recent buffs, and Blade feels it's a pretty good spot in the A tier.
Yeah, so APC has received significant damage buff. I believe it now has, they've moved its damage to the same as a Rhino, but obviously an APC is much tankier than a Rhino, so this thing will actually do respectable damage to infantry and air. It won't do great against vehicles, but the main reason APC is up here is not because of its impressive stats. It's because once you put an APC on a pad, you're going to hold that pad for a long time. Your opponent needs to bring a anti-vehicle vehicle, basically, because an air unit or an infantry is going to struggle against the APC itself, at which point, having killed the APC, they need to bring in a new unit to kill the missile troopers, because the anti-vehicle vehicle will not be good against the missile troopers. So removing both the APC and the missile trooper squad takes time and resources. So it's not that the APC performs well in combat per se, it's more that when you have some spare Tiberium, you can just hold a pad for 10 to 15 seconds for 80 Tiberium, which is what the APC does so well.
I think you kind of summed up everything that we need to talk about. The other one that in A tier is Borka. Borka is the, for those of you that don't know what the phrase is the Orca Bomber. This is a unit that's fairly new. People kind of underrate it, do they, Blade?
I certainly could see how people would underrate the Orca, especially with the stealth tank running around, which can one-shot it. But this thing is genuinely outrageous. This is one of the scariest units in the game. I think that, honestly, the Orca Bomber is one of the easiest ways to cheese a win. If you're playing against someone who is maybe someone you don't normally beat, you can cheese with a Borka and you can take some free wins, because if they're not prepared for it, this thing busts out, especially with Jackson buff. You boost it from your base into the pad, it'll kill everything on that pad in like 3 seconds. And if you do this just as the missile's about to fire, the missile will fire before they can get into place again, because the Borka will just still be bombing. So this thing is extremely scary. It also is capable of beating almost every tech unit in the game 1v1. I think even a Sandstorm barely trades with it and has to be set up on defense.
And yeah, I think people probably will start to play Borka a bit more. I'm talking about more like sort of maybe sort of gold to diamond tiers who maybe don't see the value in this unit, but I know in Tiberium it's considered very, very powerful, especially in tournament settings too. B tier, Slingshot in B tier, the newer. I think it's actually just the newest unit to the game. Why is it down in B tier? It is a super powerful anti-air unit, but it's kind of niche, I suppose.
Yeah, that's exactly the problem with it. It only has one role. It's similar to the Hammerhead and the Phantom, both also in B tier. Because it only does one thing, and it doesn't do that one thing better than something else. That's the problem. The Phantom is in B because it only kills air, and the Stealth Tank does the same thing but better, and also kills ground. The Slingshot is in B because it only kills air, and the Pitbull is in S and kills air and ground. So as long as the Pitbull is in its current state of simply being a god unit that kills all air, the Slingshot has no role, because a Pitbull is simply cheaper and does the same job and other stuff as well. So yeah, Slingshot just suffers from being in the shadow of the mighty god Pitbull.
Yep, and I think a lot of GDI War Factory units feel like that too. Down in C tier, MG Squad is a contentious one because I think a lot of people. I mean, I know so many players that swear by MG Squads, but Blade, we've kind of shoved them down to C tier.
So the reason I've got MGs in C tier, and I think this is probably going to be, this could well be the most controversial listing here in this entire list. I think even Striker gave me some grief over this one. The reason I put MGs in C is because once they got their damage nerf, they became kind of embarrassing. It became possible to 1v1 cyber wheels, 1v1 them with flame troopers, this kind of thing. They did receive a recent damage buff, so it might be that they're back to B tier. I'm not 100% they're C, but they do suffer from the same problem with Scarabs, which is that once you've pushed them off the map, it's quite easy to stop them setting up again. If they are set up, especially with Liang, they are very scary. But once you push them off the map, it's really difficult to get them back on.
Yeah, and I think that's just one of the things. Like MGs, I think if you are successful in planting your MGs and getting the protection set up, they can straight up win you a game. But if you let that slip even once, that becomes a dead unit. You can almost never build it, and it can never sort of find its way back into the game. So yeah, I think MG's, I would kind of agree. I would say maybe C/B tier for me, but I think I can fully agree that they're in C. Mohawk down in C as well. Most people would consider this a really solid GDI air unit. Why is Mohawk down in C?
This guy was great when he came out. I thought that Mohawk was going to be a really big meta changer. And to be fair, he did a lot of work when he came out because it was the MLRS meta with dogs, and Mohawk one-shot dogs, and it killed MLRSs, and it did a lot of things you wanted to do. Then they buffed the stealth tank, and the stealth tank one-shots the Mohawk, which makes it absolutely embarrassing. If you make Mohawks, your opponent will just build one stealth tank and kill every single Mohawk you make for the entire rest of the game. Mohawk is a good unit that simply cannot exist in the stealth tank meta.
And there you have it. Doesn't really need much more explanation than that. Now down in D tier, Wolverine and Widowmaker are down in D tier, by the way, because they are just embarrassing, and their vehicle damage nerf has just kind of made them a garbage unit. Titan is in D tier. Now Titan's, because it's one of the first epics that a lot of people get, it is probably one of the most common tech units that you'll see from Silver all the way up to Diamond. Titan is in D tier, Blade. Why?
Yeah. So the problem with Titan, the same as we didn't touch on this again with GDI, but we mentioned it with NOD. If you're in the temple/tech lab, it's extremely difficult to come out in a realistic game. If you have a tight game, you're never going to be having that kind of 300 Tiberium float that you need to build both the tech lab and the first tech unit. The reason that Titans end up in D rather than C is not because it's completely unplayable, but simply because it's worse than all of the other options. Since the Sandstorm got a huge hit point buff, the Sandstorm is simply a better unit in my eyes. And I think the Kodiak has always been better than the Titan, to be perfectly honest. So Titan suffers just by comparison. It's just worse than the C tier units, and it doesn't seem fair to put it in the same tier when it's simply a worse version than the Sandstorm and the Kodiak.
And I think there you have it. MLRS also, with, I think, a lot of people who used to be MLRS players, myself included. I was a very, very avid MLRS player. That is now down in D because it got consecutively nerfed. And those are our tier lists for the NOD, GDI, and also the Commanders, which we mixed together because there are only 8 of them. So that is what we feel in terms of individual units. So if you're looking to build decks, like S and A tier units are like just the best units to try and build your decks around. There are certain like B tier units that I think can be included in special scenarios, which we've talked about. C and D tier units we wouldn't totally recommend. I mean, D tier would never recommend. C tier units are viable, but they require a bit of work to make viable. They require very specific matchups or specific circumstances. But if you're looking to build your own deck, majority of the units you want to pull from are S and A tier. Okay, so that's our tier list, and big thanks to Blade. Blade, do you have anything you want to say before we go?
Subscribe to my YouTube. Shameless plug.
I think we've done lots of that plugging, so that's perfectly fine. Right, guys, we'll see you soon. Bye.
See ya.